Thank you so much for joining me on the Sweet Bites with Sandra podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sandra Colton-Medici, and my guest today, his name is Kelly Max, and he is the founder and CEO of Solvv. And we are going to get right into talking with him about what that is and what it means for social podcasting. I know that this is Kelly's first podcast with me in this format. We actually did a Solvv together not too long ago. Thank you for joining me, Kelly.
Hi, do you hear me?
I can hear you.
Perfect. I would love to turn my camera on. I don't know.
I know. I sent you the invitation to interview mode. I'm not quite sure if you got it though.
Maybe this. Yeah, there you go. That should work. Okay. Oops, sorry. Is my camera on now?
No, but that's okay. Can you see yourself on your end?
Would you send it one more time?
Sure.
I apologize.
No worries.
I did send
Did you get it?
on.
Oh, there we go.
You go.
Yes!
Hi.
Success. Okay. It's almost like, as we get into all these new technical adventures, it's like, oh, I get it. You know what I mean? Like, it's just that light bulb and you're like, woo! And it's really odd because it doesn't really take that much to connect people these days. And so I'm just excited to talk to you. So let me reintroduce you really quickly. So Kelly Max is the founder and CEO of Solvv, which is the first social podcasting platform. I actually just did a Solvv with Kelly about, I think we were talking about getting all of the new fancy features of social media into your marketing objectives for small businesses. So tell everyone, all of the listeners, either now or people who might be listening on other platforms later in a replay, what exactly Solvv is.
Solvv is the idea of a global, equal, diverse community that is in service of each other, and that allows more than just the 1% that create content today that we consume every day to create and to show up with their experience, their expertise, and find value in what they have to contribute to this world. And so the technology obviously is key to make these connections, and it's in service of all the people involved. But Solvv is really this idea of this. I always say it's the largest. It's not yet, but you always have to talk about what it will be, and the largest global, diverse, and equal community that's in service of each other, and through voice, through a short format in 15 minutes, where you address a single question or topic in a panel format of panels of 2, 3, 4, or 5 with timed speaker segments. And so the equality aspect comes in by having very specific time allocated to your perspective. And that's different than what's out there today. Today, we talk on a format where you and I have to navigate. How long do I talk? How long do you talk? I tend to be one of these people in the room that is the loudest. And I feel that we have to change that. We have to give more people a voice and an opportunity to contribute. And so we narrowed in on reducing the entry barriers to create content and to create personal brand for a lot of people out there that always get stuck or are intimidated by this artificial world, this digital world that we created on social media, and the algorithms that keep us in bubbles, and that doesn't open our lives up to a broader worldview. I hope that was not too cryptic, but that's kind of where it is. Yeah.
When you were talking about, where it could be, I just realized that you're giving me Steve Jobs vibes with your outfit today. I'm like, and very, when you're talking about where it could go, I was like, you never know. And so when I talk about the future, I really want to talk about where you've come from. So how did you start? Because creating a whole new way of social podcasting is not something that people do like on a whim. I mean, maybe you could do it like tomorrow, but I think this has layers and layers and phases of evolution. So where did you begin in tech, and how did you decide that this was like gonna be like come to fruition?
The layers are very interesting, and then you kindly sent me a few questions that I could think of, and I'm actually in this phase in my life. I'm unpacking more and more where it's coming from, and I believe that it is all of it, and together all of it. And it starts with my upbringing. I was born in Germany, in a small town next to Heidelberg, where I grew up, and I had five sisters, or have, thank God, I have five sisters. I was the only boy in that room, in that house. That already allows you, or has, pushes you to navigate the world slightly different. You're pushed to be the protector, but at the same time, you also get to know the other side of the gender spectrum in a very intense way. And so it started there because we had a big family, and you had to collaborate and you had to share work. Additionally, my house, my parents were very Christian, and modern Christian, I would say, and that always instilled good values in me. Not that I was always drawn to it. I was actually pushed away because we had to go to church every Sunday and things like that. And it kind of pushed me away and made me think about it and create an understanding of the world around me myself. And so it drove me actually away from home, to the United States. A little bit later, there was a step in between where I helped build a company. But it drove me to explore the world that's being judged also in my house, and the idea of making money, and is that good, and how do we navigate. Long story short, I think these values were the foundation for me to be a people person, to be a giver, to get energy from engaging with other people. And I did that all my life through exhaustion, which made me an expert in social interaction. And I brought that expertise to all the projects and all the endeavors that I've done. And it's what always got me in the door, no matter if it was somebody wanting me to work for their company, or me going after an impossible deal in the SaaS B2B space, like winning Daimler or Nike over SAP, Workday, Oracle, that have endless capital. We were a small vendor company that I ran. And it was the people connection that made this happen. It was not the product. It was not the great branding. All of these play a role, but at the end, I know because I asked them. I'm always curious, like, why do you like to work with me? Why did you decide to go with Hoff, the company that I worked for? And it really comes down to people saying, Kelly, and that was very early in my career, one of my first clients, that was the first time when I said, look, I'm 23. I want to tell my team how to navigate this, and I seem to be quite successful. Why do you want to work exclusively with me? And he said, Kelly, when you come into the room, the sun goes up. And another board member said the same thing, when I asked him, and he said, Kelly, when you come in, the room shines. And so I took that to heart, and I really tried to understand what that means. And it's somewhat teachable, but maybe not. And I think when you talk about these layers, it comes from my upbringing and from that love that we had around our house, and this giver mentality that I was then able to combine and merge with this idea of becoming very successful and taking that and bringing it to the world. And it took me quite a while to get there, but with Solvv, we now really have this opportunity to do this on a large scale.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because I knew I heard a little bit of an accent, but I was like, he's from Vancouver. So I was like, I didn't really, put the two and two into connection for Germany. But so as someone with this kind of evolution, from another country to the United States, there are so many people who may even think of your story and be like, I want to do that, right? I want to go on that journey too. And not necessarily exact same steps, but what are some of the things that you would say maybe to your younger self that you would have loved to avoid or loved to have hopped over that step, or maybe even acknowledge like I had to go through that to get to where I am?
I had to go through the steps to get to where I am. My journey was first company, 6 people. I joined as a sales rep. 2 weeks in, I told the CEO, I want your job. So tell me what I have to do. And he looked at me and he laughed. Half an hour later, he came out of the room with his co founder. He said, take your things and I'm going to sit you in front of my office. You're going to be here every morning at 8 and you're going to be at your desk at 8. And you're going to pick up the phone and you can do 200 calls and see if you can get in. It was a staffing recruiting firm, so we had to reach out to a lot of people. And but the fact that I took my own destiny in my hands that way by speaking out what I felt was the first step for me to get attention and to get an opportunity to work extremely hard, but be directly connected to the founder of this company. And that was important because I became kind of the prince of the company. I always say I didn't have shares, but we built it from a $2 million business to a $200 million business in 7 years, which for Germany, doubling revenue every year was huge, right? It's like if you think about, Silicon Valley and, the hype in the US, but for Germany, we were kind of like this showcase of how to do it. But we did it and he did it and I don't want to exclude myself, but he did it extremely harsh. And hire and fire. It was like this very typical hire and fire mentality. Hire 100 people, fire 50. Out of these 50, the lowest 20 will be top performers. And so after a while, he was the heart leader and I was that love leader. And so I was always in between and he needed me because I was able to speak to the people and I was able to communicate to the people in a different way. But I learned a lot of strategy from him. I learned a lot of strategic thinking, tactics, but I applied it with my own values and we ended up in very different places, which was interesting. So I learned there that you can go big with a lot of work, but there's certain ways that you need to align with that are okay with your values and what you have to say. Or what you try to do. And I left that company. I brought it to Los Angeles. That was my step into the US. I'm half American, half German, so it was easy for me to move over. But I brought it to the United States and we had a falling out 2 weeks in. Literally, I was still in the hotel, 3 suitcases packed, changed my entire life. And I said, I'm going to leave. I can't do this again the way we had a different agreement. And then we talked for a day. We walked literally for 5 hours and we talked it all through. And I stayed for another 9 months, but the time was at an end. And so I went into a first exploration phase in Los Angeles. And when, a young boy from a 4,000 person town from Germany wanting to dream big, coming to Los Angeles, there's a lot of distractions. There's a lot of new things and for everything from parties to drugs to everything that you imagine that LA has to offer, and also great people, but also this very superficial culture of wanting to get ahead. Can you help me, and how can I help you? But that's not really the question. It's always how can you help me? And I wanted to be in tech because I felt that tech had this massive opportunity where you don't necessarily need to be an expert in it if you are able to assemble the best people around you to do it. And so I felt that LA was not my place. I didn't want to become an actor. I didn't want to become a producer, even though I liked the idea. I even had a phase where I tested me being a photographer. I bought a camera, put on some nice glasses and a hat. And then I started shooting events and I thought maybe that's it, right? So I was on this journey to find my passion. But I learned that this sparkle that LA holds, or the story that LA holds, was not me. So that was another step in my journey where I felt, okay, there's an opportunity in the United States, but there might be different places. And so the next step, I had a company that I brought from the US to Germany in between because I needed money and I had to start working. I did some entrepreneurial concepts and I thought, I'm going to change the world and I'm going to write these projects. But I was not ready. I was really not ready. It was too superficial. There was no depth to these concepts. The ideas were great, but if you can blow life into an idea, it's just an idea. And so I was not ready yet to do what it takes to really take one of them off the ground. And so I joined another company that was in Germany and I brought it over. So somehow I became an expert in bringing companies from Germany to the US and vice versa. And that one was really interesting because it was an HR company. And the first time I got a call from a former board member that I worked with, and he said, hey, I really think they want to go to the US. I think you're the right person. And I said, what do they do? And he said, HR. And I'm like, oh, I can't go back to that space. He said, wait, they have a philosophy that employees run companies and that people are in the center of everything we do. And if we can build systems around people that support them instead of putting people into the system as an element to make the system work, but rather elevate the person and build tools around them to make them find their perfect fit in the company and find ways to grow their talent and their skills and to become a good, strong team member and a leader or a manager within the business. And I said, you got me there, because the earliest experience that I talked about, it was not about the people. It was all about the profit. And then this one was all about the people. We had democratic leadership elections. Like, we tried a lot of things. And so I joined the company and I said, well, if I can find a way that we can win customers that have 100, 200, 300,000 employees, and we help these employees live more fulfilled at work, where we spend 60% of our time in life, which impacts our life, then they will take that energy to their families and to their network, and they're happy and fulfilled, and that will have a ripple effect. And so if Daimler, 300,000 people, will work on a system and that was before it happened, but if they would work on a system that follows our philosophy, we could impact millions of people. And so that was my driver. My driver was to make a dent in the universe. And so, but then what was the learning? The learning from there was, there's still politics and there's still a board and there's still a family manifesto that defines what we can do. And so I felt almost like in a cage where I had all these great ideas, what we could do, but I couldn't go there. And so I came after 7 years, which was end of 2019, we came to the conclusion that it was not the right fit anymore, for me and for them, because they wanted to keep focusing on the German-speaking market. I wanted to keep focusing on the US and go big. And so I exited and I decided to do it myself this time. I decided that I had enough experience. I went through this 3 times, that I now am ready to do it myself. Yeah, but that's kind of the layers that all brought me there. So I wouldn't really want to miss one. I kind of wish that I would have gone through them a little bit faster, and started Solvv. But there's always a right time. And a good friend of mine always says, go to the right place and wait, right? And then you will find the right time. And I think that's the case for me. I had to go through this journey to get to the right time and prepare myself for the right time. And the right time was 2021.
And it's crazy because a lot of people would say the same thing about something like Clubhouse, right? Like, you would have never thought that something like that would have been in the right place at the right time to blow up as big as it did. And so it's kind of all about positioning, right? Like, and I use this quote all the time, is, I think it was Will Smith who said something like, I don't have to get ready, I stay ready, so that you are in that moment, so that someone can literally pick up the phone and say, this is your moment, right? And not that that actually happens. Like you might be picking up your own phone to say this is my moment, but I think that that's very interesting that your over and over again experience was like, I now told myself I'm ready. You know what I mean? Like I was okay at this point, this particular time to just go for it. And just kind of in that way, like you mentioned that you had just come back when we did the Solvv from this conference Web 3.0, kind of this whole experience. And so I'm curious to see from your perspective, like, are the people that you were interacting with at that particular event, are they ready for what is coming next? Do you feel like what you have to offer in this version, because I'm going to say this version of Solvv, because I know that you've got things going on. You know what I mean? In this particular wave of Solvv, are people ready for it? Do people that you encounter? Because I know I was like happily surprised at my experience on it, because I thought, wow, there's so many things involved in putting it together. Number one, getting people to show up. Number two, that people actually came with like great nuggets of information. And then number three, it's like people wanted to like hang out after. You know what I mean? Like that was like the social aspect of it to me, was like I actually made friends. You know what I mean? So are people ready for what you're giving them? And do you have anything in your like toolbox that you're saving that you can share?
To your question about NFT NYC, the Web3, where I felt an energy I haven't felt my entire life, it really impacted me and every day since I came back, because it was an energy and I couldn't point a finger on it, because I always try to understand the principle of things and why things are happening. And I always I wanted to be part of this .com boom, right? And Web 2.0, and I kind of missed it all, right? And so I felt this energy, and I came back and I told Haley, I said, we got to get in this. And I have already been thinking about blockchain and how we could actually create creative ownership for all creators for a long time now. But I put it a little bit off, or we put it off, because we said we have intrinsic value as a product and as a service that comes out of it, or for others, right? The content that you create in a collaborative manner, there's intrinsic value. You don't need to add a certain artificial value to it, right? In order for it to be valuable to somebody who has a question and who wants to find insights. But the energy was so, it got into me in a way where I felt I've never experienced this, and I can see that it's coming, and I understand the core principles. And then since I came back, every day I've been reading up on it, and I've dived deep and really understand it. And I feel that a lot of people I met are part of the hype, but there's also a lot of people I met that really believe that it's changing the world and that it's going to be part of our future, and the way that we transact goods, the way that we deal with art, right? In a digital space, we're living in a digital world, the way that we secure identities. And all of these things, all of these aspects are things that I'm looking at in order to protect our community, to keep it authentic. That's one of my biggest fears, is that we have 5 Elon Musks and 10 Will Smith, like it was on Clubhouse. Like you had like all these, people, and I take a stance for, we don't want that. This is not our community. Our community is a community where if you give me an insight, it's totally fair that I know who you are, and that we have a conversation that is trustworthy. And trust is a big piece of our community and our product. But again, this energy was so inspiring to me that it really did something that I'm actually absolutely excited about, that we're looking into very, very concrete at the moment on how this can look like in the world of Solvv, and how we as a company can help the early masses transition into this Web3 space because it's very cryptic. The biggest friction is people don't understand it. And there's this very, very tiny percentage of the population that really grasps it because it comes from, we call it the nerds, right? The gamers, like they totally get it, right? They're like, it's the time for the like takeover of the nerds. But in order for it to find global adoption, we need to bridge the gap between the people that don't have this technical deep understanding and speak that language. It's a very specific language. And so I'm taking a pioneering approach in trying to understand it because once I'm not this super technical deep guy. If I can understand it and I can bring it back in my language, then I think we can tap into the masses and we take it on as Solvv to solve these problems. As the brand says, we want to help this global community engage in these new trends. So that's towards that. So to your other question, we have a lot of great things in the pipe. And I think one thing that always gets overlooked, and to your question, are people ready? The same with Clubhouse and all the audio apps, that are out now. I feel there was a hype, and I'm a big believer in understanding your product strategy really well and understanding what your core product is, what the psychological need is that you're solving for people to have a sustainable business. And I think there's a lot of apps out there right now that did not do this exercise. I think they jumped on a hype, and I feel for Clubhouse, they did solve a psychological need that was temporary. And it's still temporary, it's still lasting, but it was because people literally were seeking connection, and they were seeking conversation, and they were seeking a window into an outside world because they were locked in. And I feel, the rise and fall, I want to say carefully, but the rise and fall of Clubhouse is because of that. Because the moment I always said, once people will go out, like nobody wants to sit on 2-3 hour conversations. Like we have stuff to do, and the need for direct human conversation, is so much bigger. And I didn't like that you have to sit in, you never know what you get. Right. I was just on a Clubhouse with Oprah. I was like, I literally check it out every now and then. And then Oprah was suddenly there. I'm like, wait, 2,000 followers? That can't be her. And then she started talking. I'm like, that is her. And it was the first time she was on. And it was fascinating. It crashed because she crashed the room because she had too many people trying to join in. But that's okay. That will happen to us, hopefully. And that's a good sign. But it was interesting, I think. All these apps, like all the influencer apps and creator apps, are extremely targeted to the top 1% who are already creating. And that's fine, but it still doesn't give the rest of the world a voice. And that's what we want to change with social podcasting. We want to allow people to show up, be who they are. Don't worry about moderation. Don't worry about writing something or making it look good. You get all these services from Solvv. All we ask you to is share your perspective, share your insights on that question. And if you're stuck, don't worry, because the next panelist will come up in 30 seconds and they will keep carrying on the conversation. And you're part of this conversation that who you never know who will listen to this Solvv that might be exactly in the point that you are in and can relate to you, because we relate through similarities. And so everything that we designed in Solvv is the idea of giving people peers, right? And as they grow, you find new peers that are similar, right? But giving people this idea of, if you have only 50 followers, there's other people on Solvv that have only 50 followers. If you have 1 million followers, there's one with 1.2. So you might want to make that person and listen to those Solvv because you want to learn from that person. But then you also want to interconnect them, and and make one the expert and one the receiver of the knowledge, and vice versa. So it's this format that allows for this global, equal, and diverse conversation to happen, and to hopefully activate, even if we would only activate a 2% of the population to start bringing out a voice, the world would be a better place. And that's what we're trying to do.
Well, you mentioned something that really brought it to my mind, which was when I started podcasting, the best piece of advice people would tell me is get be a guest on other people's podcasts. And I was like, but nobody wants me to be a guest on their podcast because number one, I'm not promoting anything. And then two, I just started my podcast. So they're like, oh, you don't even have anything, right? And what I love about Solvv is that there's the option when you are creating your Solvv to hand select and invite whomever it is that you want to be on your panel, or open it up, right, to the rest of the community and have people volunteer to be on your Solvv. And I feel like that is such a huge game changer to the small creator who just wants to get out there, like you said, have voices be heard. And really just wants to be on a panel, right? And to not to necessarily to prove themselves, but it gives authority if you are on that panel without even having ever said anything, right?
Totally.
And that's one of the keys that I think a lot of people are missing in all of these things. Because I was actually just talking to I work with this creator manager for LinkedIn. And I had mentioned that somebody recently they had rolled out newsletters to everyone who has creator mode on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
And someone had actually posted a comment saying, oh, they've lowered the bar. And now everyone who has creator mode on can now have a newsletter on LinkedIn. And I said, you know what? And I actually had to post a comment and say, every single time there's a brand new feature on any sort of social media platform, they roll it out to the same people, right? To the same 1%. And then those voices continually get the goods. And it reminds me of, when people go to gifting suites in Hollywood, right? And I've been to them and it's fine, it's fun, it's whatever it is. And a lot of people think it's just kind of bouge and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But you're giving people free stuff who can afford to buy it, right? And it's kind of like this
Mm-hmm.
reverse psychology of what, like, if you're giving the free stuff to the people who can afford it, why don't we give the free stuff to the people who are just like craving it, who would love to like test it out and be the person to,
Totally.
sing the praises, right? And it reminds me of that. When I got onto Solvv, I was like, you can either select the people, right, that you want to invite, and if nobody gets on, then it does open it up to the community, or you can go the opposite way, which is just tell it, I want 3 or 4 guests or however many you decide, and then it opens it up to the community to say, I want to be part of this conversation because I have some value to add to it. And I don't know if that was the intention behind it, but that's what I got from just that one feature of Solvv.
It was actually. It's to be fair, it's definitely was like to create a global conversation. We need to invite new people into our conversations. Otherwise we don't, right? We stay in our bubble. I ask my friends. You reached out to me to come onto this talk, and I know there's a lot of work going into this, and you're an expert I'm fascinated by the amount of social profiles that you have, and we're building it up, and we're getting there. But that's the key is, if you want to feel comfortable with somebody that that's okay. Start there. Take your buddies, take your friends, right? You can do 10 solves. If it's not the best solve, it's fine. It's just not gonna go get populated a lot, but you practiced, right? And but if you're willing to open it up to the community, you now have an opportunity to create meaningful connections, create new friends. And we just talked about this last night. Haley said, I feel I've gained, and she runs all the solves. So she literally, or most of them, not anymore. We had too many now that we had to expand. But while we're with it before we have the app out, but she said, I made so many new friends. Like, it's such a friend maker, and it's fascinating. And we even hired people already from the community we never knew that now work with Solvv. And this idea of a strong network can take you further than any sales or marketing pitch. That, and the limitation for many to be able to create that, because they're not in the right city, they are not in the right place in the world, they might not have the guts to put them out there. Whatever it is that it takes, networking is a lot of work. And so we felt if you can have a conversation with somebody on a very specific question, it's not about what can you do for me and what can I do for you. It's about 3 to 5 perspectives on that question, which then allow for a follow-up conversation that's a, wow, we created together. Now that's really cool, right? We have a win in our pocket. Now I can connect with you and you know that I invested in you and you invested in me. And that way we can have a follow-on conversation and potentially, Sandra, you and I will be business partners for life, right? Because we were on one Solvv. Who knows? But we're already here. And that's the idea. If we can accelerate that, I think we do something that really makes a difference in people's lives, and that's the goal.
Definitely. And I know that I sent you a few questions that I never even touched on, but I feel like I've had you for what, 30 some minutes this morning, and I know you've got a lot of problems to solve, right? And I feel like you probably get that a lot, but I had to put one of those in there. So what is one thing, just as kind of like a last question for you, what's something that people would be surprised to know about you?
Maybe that I didn't go to college. So I after high school, and I was at the high school that basically you want to get to in order to go to college. The system in Germany is slightly different, and you have to go through 13 years of school. And I always wanted to be a fashion designer. Funny enough, I have this deep rooted, and when Solvv is successful and hopefully also allows me to do some other things. Maybe we'll create a purpose brand. Who knows? But that was always a dream, but I was scared of going to fashion college because it felt it was only women and I'm sorry to say that, but for me at that time, and the big fashion designers, the male fashion designers were gay. I was like, what if I turn gay? That was one of my, I'm like, oh my God. And and I was, and the other thing is obviously also, I was scared of this theoretical journey. I hated it. I was not, I was a great, I'm a great practical learner. I was really scared of this theoretical journey of college in general. And I tried to find a different way to get the same status badge. And so the first company that I joined, I said, I have to become CEO in order for this to be my badge so that people don't always say you didn't go to college and my life is harder because the system is set up that way. And so I gave it everything 24/7, 365 days a year, literally. And I, I feel I achieved that. Um, and when the crisis hit in 2008, for me, I always told the team, I said, look, steering the company through the crisis without a loss would be my doctor title, would be my diploma, right? Oh no, so the CEO was the diploma, and the crisis management was with my PhD basically, and that's how I looked at it. I always tried to put these status badges that the world is expected from us and that are created, artificially created, and put them on the work that I'm doing, and say I can create that in a different way, and I can go against the masses and still create something that people will appreciate, respect, and that elevates me to the next level. And so, yeah, I think the surprising thing is I didn't go to college. I didn't even drop out. I feel I was a step ahead. I didn't even spend that time. And looking back, for me, it was the perfect thing to do. I'm not saying for anybody this is the right thing to do. I think there's a lot of pros, but there's so much knowledge out there. And when you create a company like Solvv and you listen to the first 1,000 Solvv, you get so much knowledge, right? So there's so much insights, and there's books, basics of blockchain, and all these, there's, if you're willing to go your way, there's to find your way. There's always a way, and I found mine by just throwing myself into the world and figuring out as I go.
That is a great way to end this episode of Sweet Bites with Sandra of the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me, Kelly Mack, founder and CEO of Solvv. If you haven't done your first Solvv, get onto the platform because it is, and I've only done one so far, but it is life-changing. It definitely helped me rethink how to really be present in real time, literally as the time goes down. So it definitely helps you refocus your knowledge to speak in sound bites almost. And those are those amazing nuggets that I think a lot of people will be taking with them from every single Solvv. So get on to Solvv, do your first one, even if it's completely all over the place. You will understand the value of it once you're done with that first Solvv and you hear it back. It will be life-changing. And I've already made three new friends just from one Solvv. And so I definitely encourage you to do them and more too, because as he said, great things beyond this first version of Solvv are in the works. And I know that as it evolves, those bells and whistles that I think a lot of people expect with a lot of different apps that come out will be different kinds of bells and whistles, because the purpose that you just talked about potentially having a fashion line with purpose. I think that definitely is inside of everything that you do, especially in a Solvv. So think about that as you go into serving whoever it is that is going to be listening to your Solvvs, that we're in it all together in a collaborative way on a Solvv to help people figure out whatever it is in that one little 15-minute segment. So thank you so much for joining me, Kelly. And I look forward to doing more Solvvs with you and all of the community on Solvv. If you have any questions, definitely hit up. I think he has a new Twitter as of
I did actually. I actually started.
I just thought the name was awesome.
I feel so ashamed. You like people expect you to have all these accounts, and we'll talk about this on a Solvv and how to create a good Twitter account. But yes, I do have a new Twitter.
Well, I thought it reminded me of Ready Player One because it's Solver One, and I was like, yes. So hit them up and make sure that you create those Solvvs, because everybody has a perspective that you should be sharing, especially as we go into this crazy and not so perfect world of 2020 to 2021.